Okay. Hello, my name is Maris Kreisman and I run events and marketing at McNally Jackson. I'm so thrilled to welcome you tonight to another excellent virtual event for the store. If you go to mcnallyjackson.com and look at our events calendar, you'll see all the amazing writers and programs we're hosting in the coming days and weeks. I'm adding more every day, so please keep an eye on the site or subscribe to our newsletter to hear more about what's coming soon. There will be time at the end of tonight's conversation for your questions. You can use the Zoom chat function to submit any questions you have, and we will get to them before the end of the evening at 8. We're so glad that even though we can't all be in the same room, we're still able to host events this way during this difficult time. As we've changed phases from staying at home to opening for curbside pickup to again admitting customers into our 4 locations, indie bookstores like ours still need more support. And so if you enjoy free events like this and want us to keep hosting more of them, please buy books from us. I'll be posting links to buy Maids by Katie Skelly from our website into the chat, maybe multiple times, who knows.
Maris, are you using a teleprompter?
Well, now it's time to introduce you two. Katie Skelly lives and works in New York City. Her previous comics include My Pretty Vampire, The Agency, Operation Margarine, and Nurse Nurse. Skelly holds a BA in art history from Syracuse University and was awarded the Emerging Artist Prize at Cartoon Crossroads Columbus in 2015. And joining her tonight is Alyssa Bennett, who is the director at the Barbara Gladstone Gallery and the co-host of the podcast, The C Word with Lena Dunham. She is also a prolific essayist and creator of several zine series, including Bad Behavior, Dead is Better, and others. We're so happy to have you tonight. Take it away.
Katie, I love your book.
Thank you.
I love it. I'm really excited to talk about this story with you because it is one that is particularly close to my heart, which I think is probably a common theme for anyone that connects to it. I think there's a way that you can connect to the story that becomes very personal. And I wanted you to briefly start discussing with me just the basics of this particular crime, this love story crime, for anyone that is not familiar with it.
Yeah, sure thing. The Papan sisters were two sisters. They were 2 live-in maids who worked for an upper middle class French family, the Monsalon family. And they began working for them, I believe, in 1926. They worked for the family up until 1933, when on February 2nd, Christine and Lea Papan killed the mother and daughter of the family. The husband, the father, was out of the house at that time, and he came back to find his wife and daughter dead, stabbed multiple times with their eyeballs gouged out. The police came to the house after they were called, and they went upstairs to find the 2 maids huddled in bed together. And allegedly what Christine said was it was either them or us. So that's the foundation of the crime.
That's the foundation of the crime. So I think one part of the story that's incredibly significant to me, and I don't know that it's something I learned about after I'd already kind of become interested in the story, but the sort of genealogy of trauma that pervades the early lives of these 2 women, I think becomes this incredibly significant factor in the way that this particularly domestic crime starts to unfold. So they're born to these parents who are assholes. That's like kind of an understatement. Alcoholic father, very negligent mother. The father is purported to have raped their older sister at age 10. Their mother then blamed the older sister, sent her away to a convent, and then sort of started to dispatch of these other children as well. So Lea and Christine, both sent to a very cruel, stern convent school. and or I guess Lea went to an uncle's. Christine and this older sister go to a convent school. They sort of fortify this relationship, finding that there is this way to kind of engage intimately with a family member after growing up in this sort of hell house. So these sisters find these ways to sort of wend their way back to each other. The mother is dissatisfied. The older sister becomes a nun, and the two younger sisters, who are the maids, are then sort of sent to work to make money for this negligent mother. So they're thrown into this house, basically in the situation where they are each other's only anchor, which I think becomes the sort of core of the story. And something that we've talked about together is, I think that both of us are kind of particularly attracted to these stories of pairs, especially pairs of women. And I think that it leads directly back into the sort of psychosis of the overly enmeshed female friendship. And I really want to talk about that with you, because I think it's really, even though these two are sisters, it's a mechanism that I think it's sort of an engine in your work and in mine. And I want to discuss it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me bring up the the Pepin sisters there. The thing that really compelled me about this story, there's all of the brutality and there's the gruesome nature of it that, as a cartoonist, I'm really drawn to. I'm really excited to get to that point of the story and draw it. But there was so much potential for sort of graphic representations of how much these two girls relied on each other, how much their identity was formed in the other one. And so the challenge in this one was really figuring out, how do I represent this idea of folie à deux, this idea of a shared psychosis between these two girls. And it kind of manifested as almost like a spiritual entity that exists between the two of them, that manifests in different body parts, and in Lea, particularly in her hands. Her hands turn red when she's experiencing too much emotion, and through that, this sort of third sister emerges, right? So I think their closeness is something that, we talked about this a little bit, but like people were so interested in kind of perpetuating this myth that they were, lesbians, that this was an incestuous relationship, because it was something that was so extreme and so
apparent to people that there was no understanding of it outside of the lens of other extremities, I guess, right?
Exactly. And it's kind of like, they were so broken by a hostile world. Like there was really no place for them.
Right.
They couldn't be safe at home. They couldn't be safe in the convent. They couldn't be safe, with the family that they're working for. And so I think that any sort of intimacy that existed between them was going to be something that was going to be perverse to like an outsider looking in, because we don't have that sort of virality. We don't know, we were socialized, like we can't understand it.
I think also because their intimacy was fortified through humiliation, it creates this sort of other world, which kind of leads me to, I have this theory that I talk about a lot. And the theory is that when a person like you or me is attracted to a certain crime or story, you're attracted to it because it offers itself as some kind of mirror. So there's some self-reflection that comes in the encounter that makes it a more significant story to you than like a crime that you are able to, read briefly about and discard. So I first wonder when you first came across this story, and then I wonder, what is it about it for you, do you think? Can we speculate?
The first time I came across it, I think it would have been in 2014, 2015. So it's been a while now that it's been kicking around in my brain. I started working on the comic in early 2019, and I finished it in March of this year. Yeah. So this was something that it just flowed out because I was so into it and I was so excited to draw every page. And that's not always true of comics. It's not true of wanting to do any work for me, really. But the first time I found it, I fell kind of backwards into it because I really loved the film La Cérémonie, with the Claude Chabrol film, which is based on a novel called A Judgment in Stone, which is very loosely based on the Pepin sisters. And so I sort of just kind of worked my way back towards it. I hadn't watched any of the Pepin sisters films until like fairly recently, like Murderous Maids, Sister My Sister, and they're kind of great.
Of all, Sister My Sister, they're like sewing something, and it looks like you look at their hands and you're like incensed.
Oh yeah, for sure. And the films about the sisters kind of go from like extremely dour and kind of unwatchable to extremely salacious. And so I was like, I think I could probably strike something in between those things. But I think that the first thing I was really captured by in the story was the infamy, which, we have this image up here. After they were arrested, the story was so scandalous and the French press couldn't get enough of it. The public couldn't get enough of it. And I was sort of interested in that angle of like, oh, what happened to them when they were in jail? What happened? What was the trial like for them? And I was thinking of it that way and kind of looking at it from like a camp angle and thinking about notoriety. And then I got more into the case and I was like, well, maybe it would be interesting to adapt it to something that's a little bit more contemporary. Like what if I did like Maids, but it's in Beverly Hills, something like that. And then I just kept cutting away. And I was like, I just really want to do kind of the straight story as much as I possibly can. And I think it really became a necessity for me to work on, maybe like 2017, 2018, because by that point, I had hit, I think, 10 straight years in the working world. And I was so dissatisfied. And I just felt like, oh God, I'm going to be this way forever. I'm going to always be subjugated, like I don't want to do this anymore. There's got to be something else in life. And I just kept returning to the sisters. And
there it kind of is, right? Because I think that these concepts of servitude, these concepts of labor humiliation, these concepts of bondage are so wrapped up in the story. So it's very interesting to hear that you were like undergoing this feeling where you felt, trapped or in some kind of chain of servitude, and then the story appeals to you.
Yeah, for sure. Because I think, they kind of had their own methods of escapism. And to some extent, like comics is kind of that for me. I work a full-time job and I do comics on the side. And in some ways it feels like I have two full-time jobs doing that. But yeah, it just felt like something that I could escape into through their escapism. And so that was really the thing that got to me. The other thing I want to talk about is like I was in this group recovery thing for eating disorders. It's a long story, but there was this woman in it who talked about how she was kind of unusual because she was like a little bit older, and it's normally like a 20 to 30 age in those sort of things. And she was talking about how whenever she saw people on the train and she was sitting down and it was a packed train and she saw people that she was jealous of, like, let's say somebody like had a boyfriend or they were like skinnier than her or they had a nice purse, like the train would be packed and they would be going to leave and she would kick them, like kick at their ankles, kick at their ankles. And it was like an anonymous crime, right? It was this petty anonymous act of aggression.
Strangely visible also.
Yeah, exactly. It was just like, why would you do that? And that sort of like mode of dealing with the world and dealing with your jealousy and your emotions really stayed with me. And so that was kind of the way that I built the aggressions of the Pepin sisters in the story.
It's funny, I think I've written before about my world famous Papin sisters Halloween costume that
Can I bring it up?
me and a woman who I had a sort of overly enmeshed friendship with. This is my, for anyone who listens to my podcast, this is the bad influence friend. There she is in the flesh. So we had this relationship that was like, looking back on it, it seems like some kind of psychotic stress reaction. Like, I can't believe how interdependent we were, how entwined we were. And somehow I fell upon the story. I think someone gave me a copy of the Genet play. It was like Death Watch and the Maids. And I read it. And for me, it somehow became this like atmospheric love story that was like, you know, we didn't have this romantic relation, like a sexual relationship, but it was like a romantic friendship, like Lincoln and whoever, Lincoln, you know, this very intense relationship. And so we started, every year we would wear these costumes and feel like kind of socially persecuted because we weren't popular and no one ever knew who we were. So I was like dabbling around with the Papin sisters. And then at a certain point, I went to work in a house on the Upper East Side. And I was a very incompetent employee. And I worked for a very rich woman who lived there with her daughter. And it became this strange replication of the story where, regardless of the fact that if I were persecuted, it was because of my incompetence, but it felt very personal. So I felt like aggressed. I felt, you know, I was much younger. So I felt like, oh, these women hate me because I'm so young and beautiful. You know, I felt it, and I felt like I started to project all of these experiences onto that story. And I think, you know, it kind of starts to lead into why the Papin sister story was so popular, so famous when it occurred. And it's not just because it was scandalous. It's not just because it was like, you know, profligate violence. It's because people seized upon it as this kind of ideal case study for class warfare. So we had Genet writing about it. We had Lacan wrote a text on it that I believe is called Siamese Souls, which always really appealed to me. I thought it was incredible. De Beauvoir is writing about it. And it became this sort of flashpoint for, you know, feeling sympathy for these workers that were abused by their bourgeois bosses. So when I, you know, got into this story in a real way where I wanted to write about it also, it was because it felt like I was like walking on a mirror. Very strange experience.
I mean, the costume is so good, and I definitely saw it when I was first starting to do research. I definitely came across it, and I was like, this isn't them, right? I was like, it's color, no, it's not. And then it's like the Chloe bag or
like bad influence friend has an old Balenciaga bag.
It makes it so good.
That character. But it's funny looking at this picture because I feel like she was. I hope no one in here knows her, but you're free to tell her I was talking about her if you like. I feel like she was like the Christine. So in the Papin sisters story, we have Christine, who's sort of framed as the aggressor. And then we have Lea, who's framed, and you do it very beautifully, because I think that when you frame her as the aggressor, it's not necessarily organized around ideas of violence. It's organized around ideas of like, come on, let's have fun.
Yeah.
Which I really, it's like an element that is I don't feel like it's ever been read into the story. So I really responded to that because it gives it this sort of very contemporary, almost teenage appeal that I really love.
Thank you.
That's what you were saying when we talked earlier, and you said that you felt like you dreamed yourself into the story a little bit.
I think so, because I mean, there was so little insight into their minds, you know, from what we have in the case files or the court documents. There's really not a whole lot at all. And I needed something to kind of put the pieces together. And I was thinking about, I have an older sister. We're less than a year apart. We're Irish twins. And I was thinking about the times when we were like deviant together. and it was like, oh my God, we are unstoppable. Like one time we had to like, I don't know, recite a prayer or something. It was like some CCD thing. We had to like learn this prayer and like write it out. And we had to like, yeah, we had to like individually go into like this nun's office and like write this prayer. And then like, you know, the next one would come in. My sister went in and did it. And then she came back out and she had the prayer written on a piece of paper for me to like cheat. And it's the only time we've ever coordinated in that way. And I was like, we're unstoppable. But she was, you know, she was way smarter than me, and she could kind of manipulate situations and figure things out. And as the younger sister, it's like I was so jealous of that and so in awe of that. And that was the spirit that I wanted to bring to the story.
It's interesting because I think that your reading of the story is about Lea. In a way, for me, it's like Lea's story, which it makes sense now. I was just thinking when you were talking about the trial, something that I was thinking about today that I think is really interesting is that their defense mounted an insanity plea. So this crime, you know, you've described it very well, but for anyone that doesn't know about it, go read like a very in-depth article because it's like an insane crime, right?
Mhm.
Like, and something I was saying to you before, these sort of urban myth elements that come up where someone will be like, and then they dressed the bodies as though they were turkeys to put in the oven. And you read it and you're like, is this real? Like, this can't be real.
Yeah.
So there are all of these elements that seem insane. Some of them made it into court documents, some didn't. But the prosecution outright denied these women's insanity plea or their insanity claim. And I was thinking today that, you know, one of the reasons why they said they couldn't have been crazy is because they cleaned up after themselves. And I thought they cleaned up after themselves because they were maids, right? Like they look at this crime and they don't think like evidence, evidence, evidence. It's like they're thinking mess, mess, mess.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, they were never off the clock. Like, and it's so incredible how internalized that subjugation was, you know. But yeah, let's see, the the crime itself. I mean, this is the first page of Maids, and these first three pages I just kind of drew pretty much like off the cuff. I didn't really thumbnail any of them. I just kind of started drawing, and this is just what immediately came out of me. But the eyeballs being pulled from like live people. When I
Yes,
say that to
killed
people,
them immediately. That's
yeah.
what always. Do you remember that story? It was maybe like, this is very off track, but maybe like a year ago, that woman went into a church high on meth and pulled her eyeballs out.
No.
Sometimes you see her in the Daily Mail and she's like very Christian now.
Oh my
She
God.
has her eyes closed and she's like playing her guitar and singing to Jesus. It just it's so shocking that you can pull someone's eyeballs out of their head and they don't drop dead. They
They
don't turn
don't drop.
to ash.
No, no.
So
That's
these
bonkers.
Yeah. So these two, the Lancelin ladies survived for a little bit. And
Yeah.
that's a big part of the crime.
Well, I mean, if you just think about like, you know, what it would take to, because basically they stunned them, right? And then they went for the eyeballs. So like even in that sort of split second decision to like do that, you have to be really confident if you're going to go and do it. You know, you really can't like pussyfoot around it. Yeah, you really got to get in there. It's because you know, try it on yourself. I mean, not really, but just feel it. Um, but just kind of like speaking to the idea of you know walking on a mirror and sort of seeing yourself reflected in this story. That to me was like it was really important to nail that kind of feeling in these first few pages, and just kind of let people know that like you're about to enter something that's going to be you know really deeply weird and really deeply crazy. And like one of the things that I talk about a lot in comics is that comics has such incredible potential to stretch out moments. And for something like these sorts of pages, I really wanted it to be like decompression of action, really just kind of like the idea of approaching the object, getting right up into it, and like using it to enter a new world. So yeah, I'm really happy I don't have to draw that house anymore. That was such a nightmare.
I love your drawings of this house.
Thank you.
One thing I want to talk about it's a little off topic, but it's on topic.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to we had a quick discussion today about some other sets of sisters. And I want to bring some of them up because I think that there is, the way that we insert ourselves into these stories as though the stories are a mirror, that mirror kind of simultaneously exists within the story, right? So you have these two sisters that are so looped into this circuit of self-identification in one another that they are and I guess that's what a folie à deux is, right? Like you're in this hall of mirrors where you're unable to differentiate. Everything is enmeshed, everything is the same. And I think it happens when you're attracted to these kinds of stories also. And I was thinking, you brought one up that's very good that I want you to talk about, but I was thinking earlier today about the Gibbons sisters who had, and maybe we have to talk about how Lea and Christine died first because it's so strangely interconnected. So these two go to prison. Lea gets like a very light sentence because they don't think she's the aggressor. They think that she's kind of like a victim of Christine as well, like an assailant / victim. So Christine, they're separated. Christine is the older sister. She's initially given the death penalty. She collapses on her knees, mostly because she's afraid not of getting her head cut off, but she's afraid of being separated from her sister. So they're put into different parts of the prison. Christine's health starts to fail. She somehow tricks some hapless jail, like a jail guard, a prison guard, into uniting her and Lea. She says, please, please, please. This guy's like, all right, I'll do it. So he brings them together. And the story is that as soon as Christine sees Lea, she rips her shirt open and says, please say yes. It's like some crazy story. Again, one of these stories where you're like, did that really happen like that? So eventually they're separated for good. Christine can't stand it. She wills herself to death, basically. So her death is designated like an instance of some, I don't even remember the word. It's like some wasting disease. You look at it and you're kind of like, she either starved herself or just like willed her body to stop working.
Right.
And then strangely, Lea only serves 8 years of prison and then gets out and she goes and works as a maid. Which is so strange. But it reminded me a lot of the Gibbons sisters, and I really want to talk about them with you.
Yeah.
Because I feel like they're like neighbors somehow.
I think so. I mean, there's like there's this will to self-destruct that's in those stories. I mean, Christine's death, if you think about it, like starving yourself to death is so it goes against everything that your body wants. So I'm sure that at any given opportunity, her body is like screaming at her, like telling her to get some kind of nourishment or, water or anything. Cause it's a very painful death too. Like your tongue dries up, it cracks. Like there's a lot that goes wrong there. Right. The Gibbons sisters, I actually don't know that story, I think, as well as you do.
So two twins, a set of twins. They grow up in the UK somewhere. They speak this sort of, it's kind of referenced as like a very fast version of Creole that a lot of people don't understand. So they're sort of isolated within their community and they then begin to more profoundly isolate on purpose, I think, much like the Pepin sisters did. So they sort of start to split off. And the language that they're speaking becomes less and less intelligible to people. No one can understand what they're saying, even within the family. It's the sort of private circuit of communication. So they're there were stories about them like being let out. The teachers at their school would start letting them out early because they knew if they were released at the same time as other students that they would be teased or bullied. So they're like orbiting around life, but together. So they start getting into some bad behavior. They're like drinking and smoking, doing some drugs, and they are considered to be kind of mute because they won't communicate with anyone else. So when they're getting in trouble for these things, they're not able to explain themselves. So they get put into like a mental hospital facility where they're kind of increasingly medicated with medications that they may or may not need. They start writing. So if anyone ever comes, hey, McNally Jackson, if you ever get a copy of a book called Pepsi Cola Addict, which is a book that one of them wrote that was published on a vanity press, but they wrote several books like this that are about like American teenagers in Malibu, but not communicating with anyone else in the world, just speaking in the secret language and writing these books and like radio plays. So it's like because they're being heavily drugged, because the behavior is very antisocial, they get really locked into the sentence in this hospital. They're unable to get out. And apparently the story is that there's this, I don't know if it was tacit or spoken agreement that for one to live, one had to die. So one of the sisters wills herself to like fine one day and then dead, gone. And they're young. They're not like old people. I think probably like early 30s, late 20s or early 30s. So one of the sisters dies and the other one kind of goes on to have like a relatively normal life considering the circumstances. But it so reminded me of Lea and Christine, and Christine maybe somehow thinking the only way for this person who I love more than any person in the world to go forward with life is if I'm obliterated. So this gesture of self-obliteration so that the double can like walk the earth, I think is really insane and interesting.
Yeah. And that's a really good way of putting it too. And it kind of lends sympathy to Christine that I didn't really have before, because you look at the story, just kind of like the straight facts of the story, and it seems like, okay, maybe Lea was like a little bit slow, maybe she like kind of, maybe she had developmental disabilities, she just.
Show them in the chic picture, because they do look chic in that one picture.
Oh my God, yeah. The picture where they have the cool jackets on.
Yeah.
And then in the other picture where they look like the Gallagher brothers from Oasis. But
oh my God, that one on the left really does.
Right?
Incredible.
The idea of like obliterating so the other one can live is really, it's really generous. Like, but there's a part of me that I'm like, I don't want to be that generous to Christine, because at the same time, she did have Lea so under her sway for so long.
What do you think Christine's end game was? What's the end game?
That's a great question. I think that the Christine that I wrote, the Christine as I understood her end game was kind of like to protect her younger sister, but to make a life that was going to be as safe and easy as possible. There's a certain kind of ease to their almost captivity, because they didn't really have to go forge out anything new. They were able to, just exist under the scope of the Lancelot family and how much they would allow them to really live. And I think that was something that was kind of comfortable for them, because they were used to this almost incarcerated life. Right. But yeah, I mean, what do you think her end game was?
I don't know. You know what I thought was really interesting that I learned today that I, for some reason, I either hadn't registered it or I'd never heard it before, that much of the communication that went on within the Lancelot household between Madame and the maids was written, that there was very little verbal communication. And I think, there's a certain part of the story when, the story is that at first the sisters are treated quite well and they're paid well and they're performing well. And the Lancelots are kind of the envy bourgeois society in Le Mans because they have these two great servants.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a certain moment where that breaks down. So there, and I don't, maybe you know more about the story than I do, but there are like some mental health issues happening within the Lancelot family with Leonie, is that the mother's name?
Yes.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Within Leonie, where she starts to, there's maybe like some static with her daughter, and she starts to react against the static by punishing the Pepin sisters.
Mm-hmm.
So when she starts punishing them, she's punishing them not only verbally, but there's a story about her, Lea had left a scrap of paper on the floor, and Madame Lancelot pinched her very hard and like forced her on the ground, made her look at the scrap of paper and said, if you do this again, I will do it twice as hard. Something like that. So it becomes this master-slave relationship, right? Like this classic Hegelian master-slave relationship where once the verbal and physical communication shatters the protective sphere, something snaps. It's like Christine, who would have remembered her father's raping of her sister, who would have remembered the alcoholism, who would have had these much more salient memories because Lea had been sent to live with this uncle and was a little insulated from, I think, the violence in the family. And I think that once that protective barrier was kind of trespassed by words and by violence, I think that she was reverted back to this early time, and she got it in her head that she was going to protect the sister who she hadn't been able to protect before.
Yeah, definitely. It's a strangely wired success or survival mechanism. You know, like it's just kind of get me out of this situation as immediately as possible and let me get my sister out of it.
And
too.
was it Lea or Christine who she yelled something like, "I'm going to massacre you"? It's like this crazy volcanic eruption of id that has been like building for 30 years. And then, I think Lacan described it as, he called it a paroxysm of violence, which always really stuck with me, like this epileptic seizure of violence.
I mean, what's so interesting about it is, like the court records, Lea is like on record as saying like, my sister, I watched her gouge her eyes out, and then she told me to go gouge the daughter's eyes out, and then I did it. And it's like, I mean, in a way, I don't know, it's almost like Lea was, or Christine was just kind of like another member of the Lancelot family, just sort of giving out orders to Lea, and she's like happy to fulfill those. Yeah. I mean, I want to go back to your bad influence friend, if that's okay.
Okay.
I mean, during that time period, did you feel more like the Christine or more like the Lea?
I think I was more of a Lea in a way, because I think that I think I started to describe this and then I didn't. Like in that photograph of us, I think that she looks very passive, and it really belies her personality because she's very aggressive. I remember, like, it might have been this night or another night, someone accidentally spilling wine on me and she grabbing the glass and throwing it at them, like very aggressive person. But there is, this is like, I look at this picture and I'm like, that's the most depressed I ever was. And I think that there's something about that vulnerability as a woman, that when you link up with someone who's like you but stronger, it's very compelling. And it feels very compelling to be able to sort of like surrender the controls to someone else and let them drive the car. And I think that's what this picture is to me. And it is a strange, confusing, weird thing to look at her and think like, you're acting so shy.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, God, it's iconic. I'm so obsessed with it. It's such a good photo. I mean,
I still have the costume. You can try it on anytime.
Oh my God. All right. So that's what we're going to do for Halloween. Oh, you also sent this to me. This was a screen grab of more sort of internet theorizing about the Pepin sisters' incestuous
There's
relationship.
so much of it. I think that the two places that people really seize on are lesbianism and incest. And I'm not sure, it's a funny thing, I'm not sure why people need to make the story more Baroque. You know,
Mhm.
like it's a very
Right,
Baroque story.
right.
I think that there is something about the level and the type of violence that was enacted in this crime that makes people have to, in order to kind of further distance themselves from the, you know, like I could never, which is always, I think the impulse when you read, when you're disgusted by something, the
Mhm.
disgust is I could never. And I think to further that, they need to pathologize these women more,
Mhm.
and we pathologize them sexually, which I think is, you know, a really classic maneuver for how
Mhm.
we treat all women who do things that we would like to think we would not do.
Yeah, for sure. There's also, I mean, there's this kind of poetic element to the idea of this incestuous relationship too, that kind of lends the story this almost like equus sort
Mm.
of feel. So the idea, like I've seen theories that, you know, the girls did have a sexual relationship together, and then one day it was discovered by the Madame Lancelot,
Right.
and so that was why they went for their eyes, because
Right.
they had seen what they should, like this aberration.
Mhm.
It's really too neat. I don't think
But it's
that
also,
it worked like
I
that.
we do that so much. Like I was thinking, I've heard theories like that about Lizzie Borden. Like
Mhm.
we have to I don't know, in order to turn the story over. And maybe it's we're all, I think we're always looking for another way to turn the story over, to revolve the story in our hands, because there's sort of never enough. I think if you're compelled by a certain crime or a certain story, there's never enough. So we're, you know, we just sort of culturally keep digging, see what we
Yeah.
can turn up. It's like Marilyn Monroe also. I just saw that there's like a new, someone's doing a new television show about Marilyn Monroe, and I thought, haven't, it's like, you know, those Dungeons and Dragons dies that have like 8,000. It's like you need another side on this crazy Dungeons and Dragons die.
Yeah, I know, for sure. How much more do we really need?
How much, it's all on the internet anyway.
It's on the internet anyway. And also, like, you know, sometimes the most straightforward thing is actually what happened, right? Like, you
Right.
know, we can just kind of ascribe this situation to a state of psychosis. Like, I don't think that there necessarily has to be any sort of any sort of poetry to it really beyond that, because what it is something that's so dark and so compelling and so crazy that you should just kind of confront it the way that it is.
I mean,
And
it's a story about humiliation, and I think
right.
about fortifying intimacy via shared humiliation, which is
Mhm.
so abject and dark without needing any gilding.
Yeah.
Like we have it all there.
Yeah. It's all there.
It's all there.
So I chose not to pursue the incest storyline so much.
I
I wanted,
appreciated that,
thank you, thank
actually.
you. I wanted it. It's funny because I think when I first told people I was doing this story, and people that know my work were like, "Oh yeah, so that's obviously going to be going to be what happens." And the more I wrote it, the more I was like, "No, I think that there is probably an intimacy there that is inappropriate, you know, by our sort of standards."
It's
But
like the bad influence friend intimacy, like sleeping in
exactly.
the same bed, patting each other's hair,
Mhm,
this
mhm.
weird interpretation of like maternal care that's inappropriate. It felt very familiar. It really, it was like very conclusive. Your rendering of it was very conclusive to me because it was very familiar.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad. It's, yeah, it was just something that was like, I need to show that this is perverse, but it's not necessarily like, it's not vulgar, you know?
Right.
it's not sensational,
Right.
which I don't know. Some of the Pan Sisters movies are so
They're all like
schmaltzy.
that.
They really are. Sister My Sister is the one that like I think it really takes the cake in terms
It's
of
like I don't know. There's some I haven't seen it in ages, but there is some sewing scene where or like a needlepoint. And there's like a
Mhm.
hole, and you look at the hole, and you're like, I get it.
Yeah,
I don't
right.
know
I
what
think that's the one where Genevieve, the daughter, was this like kind of little like roly-poly girl.
right.
I say that I'm also a roly-poly girl, so I can say that. But I was just like, what is this like Veruca Salt girl? Like,
Right.
I think we're at quarter of. Should we take some questions?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm gonna ask Maris. Hey.
Yeah, hi, I'm back. This has been one of the most compelling conversations I've heard in a long time.
Thank you.
As I wrote in the chat, you must have questions for Katie and Alyssa. Put them there. And if not, I'd love to just hear you two talk a little more. It's fascinating.
Sure. Oh, we have this diagram.
I love this diagram.
Lea is sitting up in bed.
Innocent.
Oh, there's also the crime scene photo. I probably should have warned people. Let's see.
I
Oh,
find that when crime scene photos are old fashioned, it's such a strange thing. If it's old fashioned, people are no longer moved by it. I mean, certain instances, yes. There are certain instances where you cannot help but be moved by it. But with a picture like this, it's like it's too antique and dusty for people to hear. It's a strange thing.
Yeah, you don't get a good eye for any of the detail. But I mean, I think like if you look at, I believe those are Genevieve's legs in the front, just kind of seeing how, carved they were, really speaks to the extremity of what happened that night.
Did you ever read about they're not connected, but somehow connected, the Blanche Monnier case that was probably like a little before this, probably
No.
late 19th century in Paris, where a 25-year-old woman wanted to marry a man that her mother thought was tacky. She was like, but I love him, Mommy. Mommy was like, no. She was like, but I love him. So in response, the mother, I don't know, made some public excuse, but locked this woman in a bedroom for 20 years. And eventually someone was like, what the fuck happened to Blanche? And there's nothing in that room except my old shoeboxes. Do not go in there. And so the guy goes in and she's in there and she's like a husk of a person. But it's this, it somehow replicates something in the story for me about about domesticity and control.
Yeah, that's wild. I'm gonna look that up after this.
There's one horrible picture of her on
I'm gonna find it. Also, Violet Nozier. Do you know that case? That was like shortly after this.
Very familiar, but I can't.
That is a young woman attempted to murder her mother and father by poisoning them. I think that was in like 1936. It was a few years after the Pepin sisters. I believe the mother died, but the father survived. Or I may have.
How old was she?
She was pretty young. She was in her 20s, I want to say.
There's a film about it, right? Is Isabelle Huppert in a film about it?
That's another Chabrol film. But yeah, she was very embarrassed by her like working class family. And so she started working as like an escort, saving money and kind of having like a fun, good time life. And then I think her family was exposed as being, less than wealthy, and she was so humiliated that she just tried to.
Yeah.
There's one way to solve it,
One way to you just go to jail and all your problems are gone forever.
Case closed.
We have a few questions. Jared asks, what about the story made you want to adapt it into a graphic novel, Katie?
I'd never seen it done as a comic before, and I love comics. I think in comics, there's so much potential in comics. Like I was talking earlier about, decompression of action and the ability to show scenes happening on a very minute level, like very, you can pace it out exactly how you want to. And I just thought that there was so much graphic potential here. And yeah, I mean, I also knew that I wanted to do the story from the arrival of the sisters in the house to the night of the murders. And I didn't want to take it beyond that, which is interesting because I came to it thinking I was going to adapt it from the trial on. And I ended up doing the reverse of that. So yeah, I just thought that there was so much potential here. And this is true of pretty much all my work. I love drawing costumes. I love drawing uniforms. And I knew that this is something that would be interesting to me for the entirety of working on it, because comics take a very long time. And you also have to be able to sustain an interest in it from, drawing it, inking it, coloring it, printing it, to, having it out as a book, doing press for it. You have to really be into it for, 2 or 3 years almost. And I just knew, because the story had been with me for so long, that I would sustain that interest.
Matthew says, I appreciate that the first pages weren't thumbnailed out first. Drawing it sounds like it was a mysterious endeavor. That sort of improvisation continue through the creation of the book?
I generally don't work that way. I could, but I don't think I would be as successful. But what I really like to do is, with most of my books, I will write a very loose script, almost more of an outline. And with every chapter of it, I like to self-publish, so I put these out in issues. With every chapter of it, I know what plot points I want to hit. And then as I get closer to working on it, I'll kind of break that down into more specifics, but I do always leave a little bit of room for improvisation on every page, because you just don't want to deny yourself, if something comes up in the moment. I think, let's see, there was a scene in this with a dead rat, and I was like, I have something really gross, and it just came to me because I remembered something really gross. And so it's like not part of the script, but you work it in anyway. You just don't like want to leave any opportunities out. So yeah, but going straight to panel with no thumbnails, I'll try it again for sure.
Micah says, I love the relationship to the Gibbon sisters, but who are some other of your favorite twisted sisters?
Well, the Erickson sisters, who we brought up earlier, were two Swedish twins who in 2008 were on a bus in Manchester, I believe, started behaving very erratically, got off the bus, ran into freeway traffic. This is interesting. There was like a police on patrol, and it was almost like a cops TV show. So like somebody was filming the cops as they were trying to help these girls and get them to an ambulance.
So weird.
Yeah,
so weird.
It's very strange. It's very uncanny. But yeah, they were hospitalized, and I believe the older twin, not that makes a huge difference with twins, but she was released. She ended up in somebody's house that took pity on her. She starts behaving erratically again. She murdered the man whose house she was staying in. And then the two sisters reunited and then ran into traffic again. So that is a really wild story.
I think there's actually a whole ID channel show that's it's probably called Twisted Sisters.
Mm-hmm. We should watch it.
I know, it's a rich field of inquiry.
Shannon asks, would Clover from the end of My Pretty Vampire have been a good interventionist third for the Pathan sisters?
I mean, maybe, I'm not the Katie Skelly extended universe. She could have showed up at the end there. Who knows? I'm still figuring out exactly what I'm going to do next. So maybe they'll overlap.
I think that's it for questions. That was great.
Cool.
Well, Katie and Maris, thank you for having me. What a great pleasure.
This has been awesome. Thank you, Alyssa, so much for doing this. And Maris, yeah, thank you for having us. This is so cool.
Thank you both. And thank you to the audience. And please buy Maids.
By
Yeah.
Maids.
It just got a good review in NPR, and they're classy. So
That's true.
done.
Thank
Awesome.
you all.
Thank you.
You. Bye.
Bye.